Mr. President.
Senator from Wisconsin.
Mr. President, earlier today we heard a very convincing case laid out by the House managers of why the Senate should fulfill its constitutional duty and proceed to a trial on the impeachment of Secretary Mayorkas. If we were to hold that trial, and we should do so, this chart that I've been developing since I became Chairman of Homeland Security in 2015 would basically be the irrefutable DNA evidence of the crime. What I've tried to lay out in this chart is the cause and effect of an ongoing set of illegal immigration crises faced by the last three administrations. And so what I'd like to do briefly here on the Senate floor is go through that history dating back to 2012 and show the impact of certain actions, certain court decisions, certainly the lack of faithfully executing the law in this administration that has now resulted in an invasion of our countries. But let's go back to 2012. That's where this chart begins. Even before that, I had developed a chart just showing on an annual basis the number of unaccompanied children coming to this country, averaged for many years, somewhere between 2,000, 3,000, 4,000 a year. And then in June of 2012, President Obama issued his, what I would consider lawless, unlawful, deferred action on childhood arrivals. That is what has sparked all of the succeeding illegal immigration crises, is that unlawful order, which by the way, was a complete misuse of prosecutorial discretion, which is supposed to be meted out or administered on a case-by-case basis. And for the first time, President Obama, in his administration, granted prosecutorial discretion to hundreds of thousands of people. And the world took note. What happened over the intervening years then is people realize America's law has changed. And we had reports when people would come to this country illegally, they would get their notice to appear before an immigration court. Well, that was used by human traffickers down in Central America. They called that the permiso, their permission slip to come to this country. So a couple of years after that unlawful order, deferred action on childhood arrivals, President Obama faced his border crisis. He actually called it a humanitarian crisis when in May and June of 2014, they averaged about 2,200 encounters per day. 2,200. That seems like the good old days. That's that little bump in comparison to President Biden's crisis at the border. So President Obama actually took action. He started detaining family units with children that came across the border, and it worked. He brought down the number of people crossing this into our country illegally because there was a consequence to it. Unfortunately, in February 2015, pro-immigration illegal immigration groups took the Obama administration to court under the Flores settlement, which basically back in the 1990s, there's a court case with a young immigrant girl named Flores, and the result of that settlement said that DHS could not hold an unaccompanied child for more than 20 days. Again, an unaccompanied child. So the Obama administration interpreted that, well, we can certainly hold a child when they're detained with their family. Well, these, again, pro-illegal immigration groups took the Obama administration to court, took Secretary Jay Johnson to court, and they reinterpreted the Flores settlement and said, no, you can't detain a child even if they're accompanied by their parents. And so the Obama administration faced a real decision. Should we detain the parents and release the child into HHS custody? They chose not to do that, except in some situations where they felt that wasn't a real family unit and that those parents may be a danger to that child. And you can see that the result of that, basically catch and release is what that resulted in. And you can see the numbers start increasing. Prior to President Trump taking office. Now, if you remember, President Trump during his election made the open border, that catch and release, a huge issue in the campaign. And so when he got elected, again, the world noticed. They felt there's going to be a real crackdown on illegal immigration, and they stopped coming. There's a huge reduction from the end of the Obama administration to when President Trump first took office. But unfortunately, the law didn't change. That Flores reinterpretation stood. And so President Trump was faced with trying to figure out how can he utilize what laws existed, what authority he had, with no help from Congress, to address this situation. He wasn't able to address it immediately. And as a result, you can see the increase of not only single adults, but family units exploiting that provision, and unaccompanied children, to the point where in May of 2019, he hit his high point. Almost 5,000 people per day. But you'll notice President Trump did something about it. He enacted migrant protection program. He instituted safe third country agreements with countries in Central America. He had to threaten the president of Mexico with tariffs so the president of Mexico would cooperate with us in securing our border. And over the next 12 months, President Trump, by and large, secured the border, to hit a low point in April of 2020 when a little more than 500 people per day were trying to come into this country illegally. Now, what President Trump also had starting in March of 2020 during the pandemic, remember, all of this reduction in illegal immigration occurred before the pandemic, but once the pandemic was in full swing in March and April of 2020, President Trump used his authority under Title 42 and used that health emergency to start deporting people who come to this country illegally. So you can see the very small, the purple bar are the people expelled using Title 42 authority. So even though the number of single adults was rising, by the way, the reason they were rising is during the presidential debate of 2020, every Democrat presidential candidate said they're going to end deportations and offer free health care. So again, that's a signal. The world listens to what elected officials or potentially elected officials say, and they believe them. They also believe their eyes when once people start coming in here, they're either detained and expelled or they're not detained. But anyway, so people started coming into this country again, assuming that President Biden was going to win the election and the border would be opened up. And of course, that's exactly what happened. Because once President Biden took office, he used the exact same executive authority that President Trump used. Let me just quick cover that. Even after the Flores reinterpretation, the Supreme Court, in a ruling in 2018, said that existing law, even though it was weakened by that reinterpreted Flores decision or settlement, that the current law exudes deference to the executive branch. President Trump used that deference. President Trump used that executive authority and pretty well closed the border. President Biden came into office and with literally hundreds of executive actions completely reversed President Trump's successful border security measures using that exact same presidential authority. All that deference. The point that's important to understand is President Biden wanted an open border. He caused this crisis. He could end it if he wanted to. He still has the authority. Republicans in the Senate would be happy to strengthen that authority, to overturn this Flores reinterpretation, which, by the way, Secretary Jay Johnson opposed that reinterpretation. He didn't like that court decision. So we would have been happy to strengthen President Biden's authority, but he doesn't really need us to secure the border. That's the point. And again, here's the DNA, the irrefutable DNA evidence of the crime. This didn't have to happen. President Biden didn't have to reverse President Trump's successful border security executive orders. But he reversed them and he opened up the border. And the result now is probably more than 6 million people have come to this country illegally and stayed. That's a number greater than the population of 31 states. That's the order of magnitude of the problem. The impact of this open border policy is devastating. It is a catastrophe. Not only does this open border policy facilitate the multi-billion-dollar business model of some of the most evil people on the planet, the human traffickers, the sex traffickers, the drug traffickers. How many hundreds of thousands of Americans have died of fentanyl overdoses? President Biden and Secretary Mayorkas said that they're reversing all of Trump's border security provisions because they said it was inhumane. There's nothing humane about facilitating human and sex and drug trafficking. And of course, the migrants coming in this country, it is true, Venezuela is emptying their jails, their mental institutions. There are some bad people, there are some criminals coming in this country, and of course we see evidence with these migrant crimes. Horrific crimes. People who no longer are alive because of President Biden's open border policies, because of Secretary Mayorkas executing President Biden's open border policies. Now, I'm not a lawyer, I'm not a prosecutor, but I believe it's a crime to aid and abet other crimes. So, from my standpoint, I think the House managers ought to be allowed to make their case. Again, they laid out the very compelling articles of impeachment today. It's a pretty simple case. It probably won't take that long of time for them to make their case, to present it for the Senate. Why won't Majority Leader Schumer allow the House managers to make their case? Why won't he allow the Senate to fulfill its constitutional duty to try impeachments? So listen, impeachments are not that regular. The least we can do is fulfill that constitutional duty and listen to the evidence. Allow the House managers to make their case. I think their case is overwhelmingly convincing. The repercussions of President Biden and Secretary Mayorkas' open border policy will be felt by Americans for years, if not decades, to come. About the only thing Congress can do when a president or a member of the executive branch is not faithfully executing the laws, when they're completely derelict in their duty, when their dereliction of duty or the lack of faithfully executing the laws is resulting in the deaths of Americans. Again, the open border policy is resulting in the deaths of American citizens. It's resulting in young women being forced into the sex trafficking trade. It's resulting in higher levels of fentanyl overdoses. That evidence needs to be heard. That case needs to be made. The Senate should hold a trial. With that, Mr. President, I yield the floor.